Good morning, everybody. Today's main topic is going to be a title, Turning the Tide of Illegal Migration, excuse me. Um, but prior to this, we are going to have a bit of an update from Senator Black on the peace talks that have been taking place between the United States and Russia. To preface this, I would also like to make a mention of the significance of today's date, which is the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. Um, so as we look back on that day and what happened and the bombing that took place, I wanted to point out an event that's happening in New York, the 16th of August, where we will have one of the survivors of it's Dr. Mikamo. Her father was a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing, and this film goes into the events of what took place to him and what had happened in his village the moment that the bomb dropped at 8:15 that particular day. So I wanted to boost this event. We will have other courageous speakers and peace activists like Ray McGovern who will be at this event and speaking about the 80th anniversary of these bombings. So I want to pass it over to Senator Black to talk about some of the other points and then get to our main discussion.
Well, thank you, Morgan. First of all, let me just touch on the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This happened at the very end of the war, when a decision was made. Okay, let's use this bomb. We've created this bomb. Let's show it. Let's demonstrate its power. And so there was an immense slaughter of civilians. I don't know that there really was no military target involved. This was an attack directed at civilians. And for years afterwards, Americans were taught that the reason for doing this was that the Pentagon had estimated that an invasion of the mainland of Japan would involve the death of 1.5 million American servicemen. That was pretty persuasive. You know, we were at war with Japan. It was a very bitter war. So I always accepted that until, I had more time to study and reflect on what was going on and to realize that at that point in the war, the United States had sunk the Japanese fleet. They still had some submarines, a handful of submarines that were out there, but for all practical purposes, they had no access to the sea. Now, Japan is an island nation. Everything that it gets, it's all imported. And we had total air superiority. All of the Japanese Air Force was knocked out of the skies. All of their ports blockaded. And so what they didn't tell people when they were saying, Americans didn't want 1.5 million American soldiers to die on the shores of Japan. But it was a very shrewd miscalculation. I mean, it's true. If we invaded the mainland, probably would have taken 1.5 million American lives. But what they didn't tell us that there was no reason whatsoever for invading the mainland, because there already were peace talks underway. Japan had no cards in its hand at all. We had all the cards. We held the whole deck. We had the biggest armed force, the biggest Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine. Well, there wasn't an Air Force. It was Army Air Corps, but greatest military force in human history surrounding this devastated island. And it was probably a matter of days before Japan surrendered. So despite the propaganda, which was very effective, talking about the 1.5 million people who would die, the fact is that Japan was going to surrender very quickly. without any need for an invasion. Uh, so if you look behind it, behind the very dark and sinister walls of the State Department and all of these intelligence agencies, we made a calculated decision to demonstrate American power by killing a great number of people. And there was this slaughter of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men, women, children, old people, not soldiers. There was no military target at all. And it was a very brutal war crime, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. Particularly in the province of Nagasaki, we had spoke about this off air. It was a highly concentrated area for Christians and Catholics with the high, a lot of historical, um, I guess, symbols and prevalence to people who would worship Christianity in times of being persecuted for it. So I always find that to be an interesting fact that that area was primarily targeted and it had a devastating effect on Christians in the area.
And Morgan, let me just touch on that. That is very interesting because there was an enormous blowback against Christianity. It was sort of this avant-garde era of the 30s and so forth, where you just had a lot of this notion that somehow science could disprove religion, and that religion was an old-fashioned thing. We needed to get away from it, that the elites needed to kind of get modern, and the religion was for poor people, because only science would keep us rational and sane. And you look at where we've gone with relying on nothing but science, and we have now the elites who cannot tell the difference between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And somehow they say, oh, these superstitious religious people, they're, without the guidance of modern science, they won't know what they're doing. Well, I don't think there's ever been a Christian who didn't know the difference between a man and a woman. And it really wasn't until we had these elite people so indoctrinated in these institutions of higher learning that they just build theory upon theory until finally they just reach insane levels where, things that are obvious to a 2-year-old child are beyond the comprehension of people with PhDs. So anyway, back to the large Christian population in Nagasaki, I suspect, and this is just pure speculation with no real foundation, but I would not be surprised if one of the factors in targeting was to destroy the Christian base within Japan. Because if you look over decades and decades since then, you look at what we've done in the Middle East. We didn't attack Saudi Arabia with its primitive, hideous Wahhabi Islam, the 7th century Islam that today allows the crown prince of Saudi Arabia to wake up one morning and he gets a cold cup of coffee that irritates him, and he says, okay, let's line up 50 people and behead them today. That's Islam. That's the primitive Islam. It's not the way Islam is practiced by the majority of Muslims, but it is a hideous, despicable type of practice. After 9/11, did we go after them because it was Saudi Arabians who flew the planes into the Twin Towers? No. What did we do? We went after anti-terrorist states such as Libya, Syria, Iraq, and we went after especially places that had a heavy Christian base. We attacked Syria, which was one of the first fully Christian countries on the earth. We went after Iraq, which had the largest and one of the oldest Christian civilizations in the entire Middle East. We destroyed the Christian civilization in Iraq. I don't think those things were simply inadvertent.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was an element in the thought process of the people who plan these wars. I don't believe that it was just 13 goat herders out in the desert who decided to take down the Twin Towers and to hijack jets and to learn how to fly them and so forth. I think that was a joint project of Saudi Arabia and certain very dark and sinister top leaders in the federal government. And I think between those, Saudi Arabia, of course, has always had a tremendous loathing of Christianity, and the people in the White House, or at least in the federal government, who were orchestrating this 9/11 attack, Christianity was something contemptuous. They may have on the surface, gone to a church service for a funeral or something, but in an intellectual sense, there was no element of belief. Atheism is a powerful force within Western elite culture, not just in the United States, but over in Europe. So it's interesting. It's a data point, the fact that we destroyed the Christian culture in Japan using nuclear weapons, knowing that it was heavily Christian. Why did we choose that? There were lots of cities in Japan. Why did we choose a Christian city to bomb? So it's just interesting, and I appreciate you reminding all of our listeners that this is the 80th anniversary of that very terrible event, something that never should have happened, something that did enormous damage to mankind. So thank you for that.
I'm glad we get to spend some time on it. And I want to hear your comments on kind of the new events that have taken place with the peace talks in Russia and the United States.
Yes, thank you, Morgan. I just wanted to point this out. There's not a tremendous amount of news, but President Trump is going to meet directly with President Putin of Russia. And these are peace talks. Of course, there have been peace talks along the way, but this one is directly between the president and President Putin. Usually, at that level, you don't have people who simply get together to try to work something out. Usually things have been worked out and then they meet. So we shall see. President Zelensky of Ukraine is not involved, so this is an agreement that they're trying to hammer out between the United States and Russia without the complications of the Ukrainian government. Now, there are rumors. There are only rumors about what the framework of this will be, and it's certainly even the rumors don't flesh it out sufficiently. But it's becoming fairly clear that that Russia will receive Crimea, which Russia always owned Crimea except for a very brief time. So they'll get Crimea. They will get the Donbass republics, Donetsk and Luhansk, which is where the majority of this fighting has gone on. It seems that they may be close to accepting that in the other regions that Russia has claimed that that perhaps they'll hold the territory that they have gained and stop at that rather than take the entire oblast. So now it's vital to Russia that whatever the agreement in terms of geography, that there be legal mechanisms put in place to prevent Ukraine from ever joining NATO and from ever posing a military threat to Russia again in the future. There's been a lot of talk about, oh, well, Russia, Ukraine needs guarantees against Russia. Ukraine did quite well with Russia up until it, tried to come into NATO. The war started with Ukraine. It didn't start with Russia. Russia was woefully unprepared to go to war with Ukraine or anybody else. So anyway, it is interesting that this is happening. I don't think they've determined the location, although there's talk about doing it in Alaska. Trump seems to like Alaska as a midway point. So I don't know, but that's neither here nor there. It is important that the two are meeting. Now, as a backdrop to this, the administration has been very, very anxious to have a ceasefire, to stop. And the reason for this is that Russia is winning the war. Now, they were winning it very slowly, just little inch by inch. And now they have developed some new tactics, which sort of take us back to the First World War. Armor has no value on the battlefield anymore. Tanks are destroyed in no time at all. So what the new strategy is, you get a group of 3 people on motorbikes, motor scooters, and off-wheel vehicles, and you get maybe 30 clusters of these groups of 2 or 3 guys, and they charge across the open, zigzagging so that they can dodge the drones that swarm around overhead, and a certain number of them penetrate, get it on the other side, and then they gradually form up. And it's very difficult now for the Ukrainians to resist this new tactic. So now major elements of the Ukrainian defensive line are collapsing. During our last show, we talked about the fact that Chashov Yar, which is a fortress city, had fallen to the Russians. Today, Pakrovsk, which is the big target of the war, the Russians have infiltrated the center of the city. Using these infiltration tactics, they found a break in the line, they exploited it, they've gone further and further, and now they're sort of running through the city. Pakrovsk is falling right now, and it's just, it's a vast battlefield there with great numbers of forces, and it will fall, and it's just a question. Well, does it take a week? Does it take 3 weeks? We don't know. And then there are other major cities that are about to fall. So all of the Russian summer offensive is culminating in the defeat of the links that bind together the Ukrainian defenses in that area. And Ukraine is simply exhausted. They don't have the manpower to keep up with it. And so right now, President Putin has a very strong hand. He's not going to end the war just because President Trump asked him to do it. He's going to do it because he has won on the battlefield, and he's going to secure and ensure that he guarantees the future for Russia, because Russia does not want to fight endless wars. We fight endless wars. It's almost like wars are us. That's it's hard to identify a time in recent American history when we haven't been engaged in multiple wars. That's not the case with Russia. It's not the case with Iran. It's not the case with China. We talk about them as being these great aggressor nations. When's the last time that China invaded anyone? Under the People's Republic, it hasn't happened. And
I guess they can look at us and see how well it's gotten us. I mean, we're all in all of this debt. Our infrastructure is crumbling. It's I guess they do it in a different way, as in they try and you kind of hear Xi or Putin talk. They talk about the longevity of their nation, like scaling things for 100 years in the future, for future generations after they're gone. What will the new cities look like? And they're constantly building and producing and gaining alliances with different countries to build in their own countries, where we're not really undertaking that initiative, which I believe, and that is kind of the true American system. When it was first, originated, when we first broke from the British, the colony, we were about independence, about, securing one's sovereignty and developing. And to see, Xi and Putin kind of take up that mantle in the respects of what we were supposed to be doing, which is respecting sovereignty and pushing for anti-colonial agendas. It's wild to see, and I see that they get further with it. They have this BRICS alliance, which now contains majority of the entire globe's population. It's interesting to see the events unfolding when we should have been taking this initiative to kind of uphold people's sovereignty and push for development and gain relationships that way, as opposed to some of the interventionist policies that we've taken. So that's, always interesting to point out.
Yeah, and we are a different kind of nation. We're a maritime nation, an ocean-going nation. We have been throughout our history, and our geography lends itself to that. China is a land power. Russia is a land power principally, and they, both countries, particularly Russia, was very saddled with this terrible curse of communism, because communism is almost by definition a failure. It's a system where you have the proletariat that's going to rise up against the elites and kill them all, and they're going to distribute everything equitably, to each, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. In other words, those who contribute the most get exactly the same as those who contribute the least. It doesn't work. It's a failure. The economic system of communism does not work. It's a little hard to grasp, because we think of communist China as being a communist economy. It is not. It's a capitalist economy, probably considerably more capitalist than the United States. So it's hard to get your head around. They've got this, this dictatorship at the top, and that is the government, and yet the economy tends to be a capitalistic economy. Mm-hmm. Russia has had more difficulty coming out of it. That was the birthplace of communism, and they went through just unbelievable terror and bloodshed and horror as they were imposing or attempting to impose communism. They would take children from their families and put them in communes to be raised and indoctrinated. It was just a very inhuman type of thing, and they would just execute mass numbers of people. Anybody who had owned property, or they went after Christians at one time. They went after priests and ministers. Anyway, it's hard to come back from that kind of thing. But the Russians have steadily been moving towards a more free type of economic system, and we need to leave them alone. Let them come out of it. It's not for us to mess around and tell people what to do. We never tell Saudi Arabia, hey, you need a little bit more freedom, a little more democracy. No, mm-hmm. We're fine with dealing with absolute tyranny if it helps us economically. So, well, listen, maybe we better get on to our main topic here while we still have a little time.
Well, this is all very interesting to talk about. Yes, let's move focus on what the main discussion is going to be today.
Okay, well, what we're going to talk about is turning the tide of illegal immigration, and just setting the stage is going back to Trump's first administration. One of the things he was going to do is he was going to get control of the borders. This was met with tremendous resistance. You have corporate interests that are very interested in getting cheap labor that doesn't sue, people who are afraid to sue, so you don't have court actions. And then you had the Democratic Party, which had this concept that they would break the borders, flood the country with illegal aliens, and that would become their voting base. And so Biden's immigration surge was designed to permanently transform America's cultural and political structure. It was going to do this by displacing Americans with an array of squabbling nationalities, people having radically different ethnic, religious, language, cultural perspectives. Immigration was never about having compassion for people who were endangered in their own countries. It was always about a conquest of American civilization using the third world immigrants as the tool to do it. Now, we don't know, and we will never know, the numbers of illegal immigrants that were imported by Joe Biden. This didn't just happen. They say, oh, Biden, he was so incompetent and he didn't know what he was doing. On this, now I'm not saying he was the one, but he and his administration knew precisely what they were doing. And their objective from day one was ripping down the border, eliminating any border controls, coordinating with the drug cartels, with various Latin American countries to begin funneling people across the border. And at one point, they even, just to ramp up the numbers as much as they could, they set up places in all the continents of the world to gather together people of every kind of diverse culture, nationality, religion, put them on aircraft and fly them into the heart of the United States, where they were released without any need to apply for anything. So there's a very, very fine immigration organization called FAIR. In 2024, they estimated 16.8 million illegal aliens had come in. And we don't know. I think when you say there are 10 million illegal immigrants who came in during Biden, that's a generally accepted figure, but it may be very low also. In the course of all of this, America's cities were just overwhelmed. New York City budgeted $12 billion for migrant housing in 2024. And what was happening all across the country is the federal government and the state governments, Democrat governments everywhere, what they were doing is they were going in using the economic power that they had, and they were buying up all the low-income housing. So they'd go into a trailer park, and the trailer park would have a lot of people living on Social Security, disability, old age pensions, and just barely making it. And they go in and they buy up the whole trailer park. They kick out all of the residents, and they go in and they would refurbish them, because illegal aliens couldn't live in the squalor that Americans did. So they had to upgrade them for illegals to come in. The illegals, of course, paid nothing. And there's no way that the residents could outbid the federal government. Let's say that one of these trailers was worth $20,000. Well, the federal government could say, well, okay, we'll give you $40,000 for it, or we'll give you $100,000 for it. Price was nothing when you're talking about the federal government being able to just print whatever money they need. So we saw during the period of enormous inflation under Biden that rental costs were sky high. Housing costs were sky high. Well, what happens when you take an existing population with an existing amount of housing, and all of a sudden you inject 10 or 20 million additional people who have to be housed? You're going to drive the prices out of sight. And they were out of sight for Americans. They got to where they had bought up all of the cheap housing that was used by poor Americans. So in New York, they started putting migrants in classy hotel rooms that cost $500 a night. Now, American citizens, I've never been in a $500 a night hotel room in my life. Okay, how many American citizens, ordinary American citizens, ever get to see the inside of a $500 a night hotel? Well, while they were funneling all of the illegals who had crossed the border and burglarized our country, they're escorting them to their New York hotel rooms. Out on the sidewalks, you had American citizens sleeping in cardboard boxes, shivering in the cold, trying to stay alive. And the American government obviously had its priorities in order. They cared nothing at all for Americans. And so here was an example. In September of 2023, Frank Tamaro, a 95-year-old Korean War veteran, along with dozens of other senior citizens, were all booted out of the Island Shores Nursing Facility for the elderly. Why? Because New York City bought it to house 300 illegal immigrants. They threw Americans out in the street so that they could bring foreigners in, using the taxes paid for a lifetime by the people that they were throwing out. And they put illegal immigrants in. In Chicago and Denver, at the hospitals, Americans lost access to emergency rooms because of the soaring demand by illegal immigrants. So along comes Trump, who had made heroic efforts to try to secure the border during his first term, and actually had considerable luck doing it. This time, he knew what he was doing, he knew where he was headed, and he came into office with a blueprint to restore law and order to this chaotic migration system. And in the course of it, he is using overwhelming force and extreme deterrence, including deportation to dangerous countries. Now, in 2025, we are seeing the steady ramping up of mass deportations that are targeting millions of illegals, with the focus on the most dangerous and those who have been under deportation orders, but for decades now. You get a court order that says you're being deported, and you laugh and say mañana, and off you go, and nothing happens. Well, that's changing, and now detention camps are being built all across the country, including Alligator Alcatraz in Florida, a place I'm very familiar with because I've hunted snakes. I've walked up and down the runways there. It was a place that it was an airfield designed as a training ground for aircraft, not military, but civilian, United Airlines and all the different civilian airlines. And a very good place, actually, very practical place to put emergency housing. Not nearly as dangerous as it sounds. Probably not a place that the inmates want to be, but at least it's not a dangerous place. I think one of the most effective and one of the most ingenious things for controlling the borders is that the government has extended the boundaries of military installations like Fort Bliss, Texas. So if Fort Bliss, Texas was sort of shaped like this, now it's shaped like this. The extended military borders now cover about a third of the entire 2,000-mile southern border. And what this has done, federal law, going back to the Civil War, has made it very difficult to use military forces for civilian law enforcement. And so the Posse Comitatus Act made it difficult to employ federal troops, but by extending the boundaries of these military installations, now you can have military police, military, just infantry people sent out to arrest and apprehend the illegals coming across. They have captured 1,400 aliens doing this, and they have charged them with trespassing, which carries an 18-month sentence. So it's a pretty stiff deterrent. These programs have cut border crossings so low to where on June the 28th of I think this year, the arrest went down to, this year, went down to 137 in a day. Now, this sounds like a considerable number, but remember, you're talking about 2,000 miles. The entire United States is 3,000 miles across. So 2/3 of the way across the United States, that's the extent of the southern border. And so when you talk about arresting 137 people in that distance, that is very few. And you compare it with what it was under Joe Biden, it was running about 10,000 a day. And now we've got it down to 137, which is a 98.6% drop. So it is just amazing how successful. Now, the Trump administration has been given a great deal of leeway in what they're doing, and they have been very effective. He started with the Remain in Mexico program, which blocked 70,000 asylum seekers at the border, and they have to wait in Mexico while their asylum requests are processed. So that cut back 70,000. During COVID, they used Title 42 emergency powers dealing with public health, and they turned back or expelled 2.8 million aliens without hearings and without any backlog in doing that. They made deals with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to block migrant caravans that Biden had organized to come into the United States. And then, of course, they have CCOT, the prison in El Salvador, which has been used as a repository for many of the gang members, and it certainly acts as a disincentive. Now, it's interesting to watch what's happening with the Supreme Court. The federal courts, the district courts across country have tried to block Trump at every turn. It doesn't matter whether it's something that truly is suspect or whether it's something routine. You can get a federal district court to block anything. But the action has all been at the Supreme Court, which has taken many emergency applications. And it's very clear that the Supreme Court supports the Trump administration in this campaign against the immigration problem. Going all the way back to 2018 in Trump versus Hawaii, the Supreme Court upheld the executive travel bans that basically he imposed bans on people coming from certain countries, and that was upheld. And Chief Justice Roberts said that the president lawfully exercised his very broad discretion in this area. They've ruled that it is legal to detain aliens indefinitely without bail. They ruled that ICE can round up immigrants years after they were convicted for crimes and can deport them for those crimes, even if they've just been allowed to roam free since then. The Supreme Court, interestingly, has allowed deportations to third countries that have no direct connection with the case. So if you have someone from Mexico who comes to the United States, if we deport them, can deport them to Sudan or Rwanda. So the court has ruled again and again that the president has full power to exclude, detain, and deport illegal migrants. And it makes sense if you think of it. If someone burglarizes your house, if somebody bursts into your house, jimmies the window or or forces the lock on the door and comes into your house, and the police show up, you said, okay, we caught a burglar in the house. The police don't say, well, this burglar has certain rights in your house. Now that they've managed to get in, you have to provide them a bedroom. You have to feed them a certain amount. You probably need to give them a little pocket money so that they can get around. And you don't do that. I mean, people, by virtue of committing crimes, people don't suddenly gain legal clout. And we have treated the illegal immigrants for many years as though, okay, if you can bust the borders, then you get all the stuff. You can take whatever you want afterwards. And I think the Supreme Court seems to be making it fairly clear that no, that's not the case. That if you come in, you do it at your own risk. Now, one of the big things is the Trump plan is to have deterrence to enter, and one of the things that has been most effective is deporting some number, and it's not large numbers, but a small number of illegal migrants to very unstable and dangerous nations. So there were illegals who came here. The court system said, okay, they need to be deported. They said, well, I can't possibly go back to my home country. And so the administration has said, okay, you don't want to go back home? We're going to take you to South Sudan, where they're in the midst of a civil war, political violence, very difficult situation. If you want to play these games, you're going to places you do not want to go. And just the other day, they got an agreement with Rwanda. Rwanda is going to take 250 people. You're probably going to see that when this is done, it's probably going to be people who are being released after they've completed a sentence for murder, people who have evaded deportation orders many times, people involved in drug trafficking and human trafficking, that kind of thing. But it sends a message to anyone that, maybe it'd be better if we just went back home. I really don't want to take a trip to Rwanda or South Sudan. So this, I think it's probably having a very significant impact on people wanting to come here and people thinking about perhaps time to head on back. Now, if we were talking about small numbers of migrants who slip through, I don't think people would be comfortable with the very tough measures being taken. And of course, there's going to be an increase in the number of ICE agents. Right, previous to this administration, there were 6,000 ICE agents, and that number is being ramped up to 16,000. So it's an enormous increase. And but the reason is that the level of migration has been so tremendous that communities are not assimilating. It's not the old-fashioned thing where people come in and they gain language skills and they learn the culture and they learn the history. Today, the cities aren't assimilating because there are just too many. Miami, where I grew up as a boy, I was born in Baltimore, but I was about 3 years old when I went to Miami. And it was at elementary school, after they would they'd say the Pledge of Allegiance, they'd say the Lord's Prayer, and then they would have some announcements. Then they would come on and they would give 3 or 4 Spanish words of the day. And it was kind of fun to learn a little bit of Spanish, and there'd be somebody from Latin America now and then who would be in one of the classes. But it, you know, they joined the culture very soon. But now when I go down to Miami, and I've gone every year, really every year except when I was in Vietnam, and I've seen such a dramatic change. And this last time, in the first 2 weeks I was down there twice, I had people who did not speak English, they only spoke Spanish, and they would be trying to communicate to an Anglo, and they turned to me, and in Spanish, they would say to me, can you explain to this guy what I'm trying to say? Now, I don't look Spanish, but I think it is so widely presumed that everybody down in Miami speaks Spanish that even somebody who looks like me, they just presume, hey, you know, this gringo over here, he doesn't even speak Spanish. Can you translate for us? And so in Miami, 76% of the households are Spanish speaking. Mm-hmm. Amazing. And there was a phase where you could refer to Miami as a bilingual city. I would say now it would be more technically correct to say it is a Spanish-speaking city. And it's a very strange thing. We went to a restaurant to get some Cuban food. It was a nice place, kind of upscale, and the waitress came over, and you know we're pointing at the menu and different things, and she was very polite. Everybody in the restaurant very polite, but she got frustrated with her inability to communicate. So she said, "A moment, you know," and off she goes to get somebody who was better at speaking Spanish. And the other woman came, and she's trying to work, but she didn't know enough English to communicate. And finally, they probably had a staff of 17, 18 people. They went to get the person who spoke the most English in the whole organization. And this person came, and she could speak about as much English as I can speak German, which is a little bit. I can say words and phrases and so forth. And somehow we muddled through. But it was kind of a wake up that this was a nice restaurant, nice part of town. And here, not anyone was what you would call at all fluent in English. So and what happens is, if you can't speak the language, you can't learn the culture, you can't learn the history, you can't learn the philosophy that underlies who we perceive of ourselves as Americans. And so this is going on. Miami, Los Angeles, two very major cities where Los Angeles, 60% of the households are non-English. And so we're gradually, Latin America, the line, the border, if you were to make a line, not of nations, or not of countries, but of nations, of people, the Hispanic line would be moving north and gradually absorbing these southern parts of the United States. So it has been pointed out that there are public schools that are now teaching in dozens of languages. They offer Arabic and Chinese as a first language, not as a second language. So we become not a melting pot, but sort of a Tower of Babel where people are not speaking the same language, don't worship the same God, don't share a love of America or any comprehension of what it is. So it's become a problem, and I think we're to the point where we're going to have to be very tough to sort of arrest the slide of disintegration. This didn't just come about for no reason, because we have the global elite. This is a favorite weapon of theirs to disintegrate cultures and groups of people. The United Nations, the EU, Soros Foundation, the World Economic Forum, all push for open borders, and their purpose is to break national unity and to consolidate global control. They understand that if you can fracture the cohesion of nations, you can just reduce the populations to squabbling groups of people. If you change all of the religious makeup, you can turn the Muslims against the Christians against the Hindus, and you can always use those fissures within the culture to create animosity and to divide people.
And distraction. I would also include distraction from some of the other rights that are being infringed upon from the top. I think that's important as well. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think where we are right now is the Democrats deliberately flooded illegals into America, and they did it with a lot of help from certain Republicans. And but the purpose for the Democrats was to give them permanent power. They felt like if they did this under Biden, they would have the power and they could never be outvoted. And so in order to reverse this, I mean, you're talking about 10 million, maybe 20 million people. It's going to require very tough policies. And I, for one, am willing to give the president a great deal of political leeway in what he's doing on this issue to get the job done, to stabilize our country to where we can eventually figure out how to incorporate the people who, most of the immigrants will remain over time. But we need to stop what we're doing, stop shooting ourselves in the foot, and figure out how to incorporate people and unify the country once again.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that we took time to touch on this topic, Senator Black. We did get some questions in while the stream was on that I feel are maybe pertinent to address. One individual writes in, what about these people who turn themselves in at the border and were given hearing dates for asylum hearings? I thought all people were subject to U.S. laws. All people subject to U.S. law are entitled to a due process. What would be kind of your response to that?
Well, the asylum system is still operational, and people they're going through the process of applying for asylum. Now, as a practical matter, asylum is more of a ruse than anything. There have been people, certainly there are people in Syria today who can't escape from the government that we're now supporting, the Al-Qaeda government, and they're being beheaded. They're being sold into slavery. They would love to come here, but we have helped to maintain this blockade, so they can't ever leave. But the people who come to our borders are, I would say, 99%, probably way more than just 99%. They want a better life. Maybe they want a safer home. Maybe they want a better income. Things that all of us would like to have. Um, but that is not a basis for asylum. Asylum is basically that there's some sort of a threat, credible threat to you for something that you have no control over. Um, it's something as the notion of asylum came up after the Second World War. It didn't exist before, and there was a lot of movement of people in Europe, and that to accommodate it, they said, okay, well, there's a right to asylum, and that has turned into sort of a ticking time bomb against nations. And but in the meantime, no, asylum will continue. Asylum hearings will continue. I wish that we would terminate all of our treaties involving asylum. I see no rational reason why anyone should be entitled to asylum. I see times when it is just and appropriate to grant people asylum. But just like if somebody comes to the door of my house and demands to enter and say, it's unsafe for me to be out here,
Mm-hmm.
I have a right to say, I'm sorry, you're not coming in. Or maybe I say, okay, come on in here. I've done that before. I had a guy when I was at Fort Ord, and the guy he had been walking with some people, and there's a hard rubber ball. I forget what sport it's used in, but some clown threw it out the window and hit this poor fellow in the mouth. And so in the middle of the night, he's hammering at the door, and I come to the door, and here's this guy, and he's bleeding all over his face. He looked horrible, and so the first thing I said, get in here. I said, lay down here, and I grabbed him a pillow, and took care of him, and then eventually. I got him to the hospital, and then I went and I visited him at the hospital, and he told me what had happened. So, but I had that choice. You might be there, and all of a sudden some strange man comes up and he's got blood all over him, and you may say, I'm sorry, you better go somewhere else. Nations are the same way. That's the way nations are. They're they have that authority, and the idea that we gave it up to international organizations. We should not have asylum, but it is the law of the land, and it is continuing. Asylum is not going to be stopped, but it's going to be tightened. You can count on that.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to make the mention, Cornel, correct me if I'm wrong, but asylum predominantly it points towards religious persecution and political persecution. So and it probably happens more common in South America, where people are being targeted by cartels. I don't know if that necessarily gets looped into the asylum laws as it's written. I may be mistaken. It might be something that we can go further into on another show. And
but I think you're on track, and these cartels are hideous, and they're powerful in Mexico, and there are if someone now if somebody comes and demands asylum because they've been indicted for murder in Mexico, that's not a basis. But if they come and a criminal cartel is trying to assassinate them because they stand up to the cartel, that entitles them to asylum under the rules. So you're on track with that.
Nice. Well, I know that we're going way above over time. There is another question if you would like to hear from it, or we can address it at a
Cool.
further
No, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay. This person writes in, isn't it important to make a distinction between what the government can do and what it should do? We have foreign tourists who are avoiding the U.S. travel right now. Crops are being unharvested, I guess, through illegal immigrants not attending their jobs, and some people have been here for decades without problems. So how would you address that?
I guess I'd start by saying that um, I have a lot of sympathy with that notion, with what that listener is saying. Um, I I attended I was the best man at a wedding for an illegal immigrant. I think he was from El Salvador, and you know I don't dislike these people as people. But I'm looking at it from the standpoint that we as a nation have to survive, and we're not going to survive if we are simply drowned out. We as Americans, we who believe certain things, have a certain form of government, we're going to be just drowned out. And so those things that in our heart and soul, we have sympathy with many of the people. Many of them are very good people, but we have got to get control. We simply cannot be the repository for the entire world. We'll have a population of 6 million or 6 billion people at this rate. We'll be stacked 20 stories high everywhere on the face of the country. We've got to get control of it. So it's not that I disagree with what is said, and it's true. We have illegals who've come over for many decades to harvest crops, and my guess is that some accommodations will be made, but even there, if we want to bring in people to harvest crops, we need a certain number of people. We bring them in to harvest the crops. They return when they're finished. We need to control it. It shouldn't be those people who want to burglarize the country and burst in, whether they have gotten away with it for a long time or not. We need to control who comes in, whether somebody comes in. That needs to be a decision made by the nation. So, I have an enormous amount of sympathy and understanding with what the questioner has said, because I in my heart I agree with a lot of it, but there's a part of me that says, there's a time for tough love, and I think this is it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all that we have. I know that there's one person that wrote in that wants to let it be known that you are among the great American men, and that he is a former, or he is a U.S. Navy veteran from Vietnam. So that he just wanted to write in and show his appreciation.
Well, God bless him. I have. It was like a whole different lifetime in Vietnam, the things that I experienced, and I imagine that this fellow had similar experiences. So from a Marine to a sailor, Semper Fi. And anyway, so thank you very much for listening in, and thank you, Morgan, for hosting the show.
Of course, yes. Catch us next week to focus on the news.